Welcome back, AP. All right, so we are going to do our best to really cover these next couple of topics as efficiently as we possibly can, okay? So to give you a heads up, half of this flip is going to be on a presentation that is going to be very word focused, right? There will be like the things to write, as you can see, and it'll be like, oh, this thing happened, this thing happened, this thing happened, this thing happened, right? But when we get to our next presentation, which is going to be about the scientific revolution, we're going to be focusing much more on the attributes of certain people. And there's going to be periods where it's just like picture, and okay? And you need to be okay with that, okay? You have to understand that like this like whole thing should not freak you out because we're talking about specific people, and you kind of just need to know the things that they contributed to the movement. You need to understand like what things they wrote and like maybe how those things happened or occurred. So kind of get yourself ready to be able to be like pause, jot down, got it, this is what this thing means, hit play, blah, 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 blah. Now, the funny parts of the stories you don't necessarily need to have to write down all the time, but you'll see what I'm getting at, okay? And I'm also going to put in the description down below a series of videos that are really, really great. One particularly on the Dutch Golden Age by Crash Course is very solid. One particularly on one particularly on the Scientific Revolution by Crash Course, and then there are three that are actually on the Scientific Revolution that go much more in depth by Crash Course, which are from the Crash Course on the history of science, okay? So let's go ahead and dive into it, though. It's been an insane day, but let's get after it, all right? So the Dutch Republic, all right? We are now entering into the movement, the thing you know as the Dutch Golden Age, right? We are finally getting to it. It has taken forever to get here, but I think it's phenomenal. And after some of y'all see some of these pictures, I know Molly's already like, let's go to Amsterdam. So like you'll see what I'm talking about though, okay? Now, quick review, just to remember. The Dutch won their independence from Spain and the Spanish Habsburgs that were being led by Philip II in the late 1500s, right? They officially declared their independence, I believe, in 1518. It's either 1518 or 1581. And some of you are like, shouldn't you know that, Mr. Terry? Look, I don't know the date of every single thing. It's aggressive that you think that I do. All right, so let's look that up real quick. 80 Years War. The 80 Years War was 1566. So it started in 1566. They declare their independence in 1581, and then it doesn't end all the way up until 1646, all right? So the Dutch are going to declare this massive independence movement, and it's going to take lots of time for them to actually get this done. But in the process, even during that war itself, you have to understand that this is very significant, okay? You got to understand that the Dutch Golden Age is particularly significant due to the fact that it is another symbol in this time period of the dying of the aristocracy and the rise of the gentry, right? I heard Rebecca Belanger in class the other day say something about the gentry, and I was like, whoa, those guys are different, right? Our nobility is the aristocracy, right? The aristocracy is your boyars, your Junkers, right? Oh, Prussia, right? Oh, Frederick the Great Elector, Frederick the First, Frederick William the First. What? All right, so like all this other crazy stuff. They were hatched out of a cannonball, apparently, though. That's the most important thing. The gentry, on the other hand, is not your aristocracy. Your gentry is the merchant and agricultural middle class, okay? So what I mean by middle class is during this time period, your middle was still very higher up, right? It wasn't like a blue-collar middle class. It was a wealthy middle class, okay? The middle class in our modern era is a very wide swath that includes people that are hardworking or blue-collar, and then also all the way up to upper middle class because it represents such a large population of our country. But in the 1600s Europe, the middle class was kind of an upper swath middle class, right? But it was a group of people that were merchants or agricultural producers that were making a lot of money due to technological advancements and also certain investments. So your gentry is rising up, and your aristocracy's power is rising down. What, rising down? Going down, okay? And the big symbol of this is in the Glorious Revolution, right? The Glorious Revolution is a huge symbol of the dying aristocracy and the gentry. Actually, the entire English Civil War process is a great example of the dying aristocracy and the rising middle class. Because the aristocracy supported the monarchy, right? The nobles of England supported James, Charles, James. They loved those guys. They wanted them to stay in power because they were a symbol of the old way. They were a symbol of the crown. They were a symbol of the nobility. They were a symbol of their connection to rulership, right? Because what were the Stuarts, if anything, before they became rulers of England? They were considered the noble class of England, right? So the nobles and the aristocracy, they supported those guys. Whereas the gentry and the merchant middle class, they were represented by the Parliament, by the Puritans, by like these other groups. You have to understand that the gentry fought against them in the Civil War and won, right? Now, the Commonwealth period was terrible and nobody liked that, and even the gentry was like, okay, we made a mistake, bring back the kings, right? So, and the Restoration period occurred, but you do need to understand, again, the Restoration period doesn't happen if the gentry doesn't choose it to happen, right? The gentry is growing and they're becoming much more powerful, right? And a big example of the power of growing gentry definitely is related to the Netherlands, right? This right here, of course, is supposed to be a map of the Netherlands, but it's like symbolized as a lion, get it? Ferocious, rawr. All right, so now, like, big thing, though, is the golden age of the Netherlands is going to last from the mid-1600s, when they break away from Philip II in 1646, into the early 1700s. It's a very general time period. It's a very big swath time period, but it harps on one thing: no kings. It is a republic, all right? The Netherlands during this time period did not have a king. Some of you are like, but I thought the Netherlands had a king now. Look, you have to understand, I need you to calm down, Marie, Rolly, and Malaya. I hear y'all over there freaking out, but I need you to calm down a little bit because they do have a king now, but that's a Napoleonic thing. Napoleon appointed the king of the Netherlands when he took it over, okay? But during this period, when they broke away from Philip II, the king of Spain, they went to a republic, and they actually organized into a series of districts that elected regents, and they had like a parliament assembly, right? These regents went to an assembly, and each like province elected those regents, and the regents would then agree on this person known as the stadholder or the stadtholder, okay? And that person had the executive power. Now, there were some disagreements in this, like this regents assembly, and it's known as the States General is the name of their parliamentarian assembly, right? The States General. They represented each province, they represented the people, and they elected this person known as the stadtholder. Now, there were some disagreements. Some of the people in the States General thought he should have more like a monarchical power. Some of the others thought he should be more of a figurehead and just a military leader, but oftentimes this person was referred to as the Prince of Orange, right? So, William III, right? William and Mary, Glorious Revolution. That's where he came from. He was the stadtholder of the Netherlands, and when he left, they appointed a new stadtholder, right? But it's usually this guy known as the Prince of Orange, right? And that's why William and Mary, it was William, Prince of Orange, right? So they also believed in religious tolerance, much like the Prussians did under the Great Elector, of throwing those doors open and allowing the migrant religions to actually flow and flow and flow in to their country. The Dutch did the same, okay? They threw it open, they had massive immigration, and it was a safe haven, not just for Protestants, not just for Catholics under besiegement, but even for the Jewish community of the Netherlands, right? The Jewish community was allowed to fully own and operate and run their own businesses, free for the first time in European history up to this point from being segregated into cities, like certain areas of the city. This is a massively important thing. And that is going to drive a huge cultural boom in the Netherlands as well. Now, this right here is a very famous painting from the Dutch Golden Age. We will get into art and things like that here in a little bit, but this Dutch Golden Age painting really represents the ideas behind their culture, right? You have a family setting, okay? Everyone's dressed in a modest garb because they're Calvinists heavily. They're heavily Calvinist during this time period. And as you can see, like the small dogs and the bountiful harvest that is on the table, we can see heavy amounts of prosperity going on in just this image alone, right? So you also are going to see a massive city structure being built up, right? That right there is Amsterdam, right? So that's not even a good picture of Amsterdam. But Amsterdam is going to also be a big symbol of how the Dutch make their money, which we haven't even brought it up yet. The Dutch are going to make their money Via trade, right? The Dutch become the trading powerhouse of Europe during their golden age, okay? And they design their cities to match. Much like Venice was the trade powerhouse of Renaissance Italy, the Dutch become the trade powerhouse of Northern Europe, and they design their city much like the Venetians did, with canals that connected the entire area, right? So literally, there were apparently children that went to school on boats in the Netherlands. How cool is that? Not a school bus, a school boat. Not like it was really big and yellow and it took a bunch of kids, but I'm just saying, there are literally places where you could pull up your boat and park it, right? Like, so there are these different areas of Amsterdam that really represent how they made their money, all right? And you need to understand that this commercial progress is going to be coming from massive trade organizations, right? They also are going to hire privateers to show them how to use slips and spillways and actually use like the internal areas of the Dutch Republic. The Dutch East India Company is going to grow and grow and grow and see huge profits and corner the market in shipping, and they're going to become the largest shipbuilders of Europe. And then there's this one other thing, war. Okay, like jot down war as well. War became very profitable for the Dutch actually during their time period because it brought in new goods, it brought in new ideas, it brought in new people, and it really stinks because like it also led to like the Anglo-Dutch Wars, which ironically enough ended up actually helping them economically, which was really surprising. But war it's bad for your people, but it was really good for the economy of the Netherlands, right? And they had in the Netherlands, and still to this day, over 400 miles of canal networks. Look at this thing. Like, it is so easy to move product throughout the Netherlands. There is a town in the Netherlands that has no roads. It has 0 roads. It's just canal networks, right? So, and they begin a very large agricultural thing of draining the swamps outside the Low Countries and using them to plant more things so they can trade more items. And we'll talk about that in the agricultural revolution. But just jot it down somewhere, the draining of the swamps or the draining of the areas, right? The draining of the Low Countries. And then you're going to see a vibrant, beautiful culture come off the back end of it. Just look at Amsterdam. Look at it. John Green wrote The Fault in Our Stars while living in a 17th century Dutch house in Amsterdam. That is one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. Like, how do I do that? How do I get a chance to do that? Do I need to write a book? Do I need to start a YouTube channel only? Do I need to quit teaching? How do I want to do that? I want to do that. Like that's awesome. Like, it's gorgeous and it's beautiful and it's a symbol of their commercial progress, right? The Dutch are going to leap forward during this time period, and they're going to make more money than they know what to do with. One of the biggest ways is also like symbolizing how much money they were making is during this thing called Tulip Mania. All right, so like Tulip Mania is a big reason why the Netherlands are covered in this one flower, tulips of Netherlands. All right, so you have to understand that Tulip Mania is going to be a big reason why, okay? So the Netherlands are covered in tulips, all right? They're covered in these beautiful, different, rare breeds of tulips. And it's all because of this thing, this market bubble that happened during the Dutch Golden Age at the very pretty much the beginning of the Dutch Golden Age in about 1636 to about 1637. When tulips were discovered and then brought back to the Netherlands, royal families and wealthy families began to clamor over having them, right? And since the supply of the bulbs was so low, they began to become worth a lot of money. And at the height of Tulip Mania, tulips were worth upwards of $750,000 a bulb for certain breeds like this one. It's wild, right? Tulips became worth upwards of 200s, like florins or talents, these gold coins worth massive amounts of money. And this right here is kind of a symbol of that giant leap forward, right? We can talk about other ways that the Dutch made money, like civets cats was a big way they made money. Spice trade in Southeast Asia is a big way that they made money, but the tulip market bubble is just kind of a very interesting thing to talk about. And by the end of 1737, in May of 1637, rather, not 1637, the prices came crashing back down because, as you can see, the supply of tulips got so great. You know what I mean? Like, so it's just an interesting idea to understand that these ideas of supply and demand and markets are going to actually come in under the Dutch. And that prosperity is going to drive innovation, right? Prosperity is going to drive innovation. You're going to particularly see it in like scientific advancement, inventing, and things like that. This right here is by Jan van der Heyden. Is going to be a Dutch painter and an inventor as well, who invents multiple different things to help out the Dutch during their golden age, right? They're going to invent, or he's going to invent, long burning wicks that go inside of street lamps so that the canals and roadways of the Netherlands are lit for longer periods of time, greatly reducing the amount of crime that was occurring in the Netherlands, right? So also, he's gonna invent this thing, a movable mobile pump that an intake hose can be placed inside the canal, and a pump then pumps out water to prevent house fires in the Netherlands, right? To prevent something like the Great Fire of London from happening, they have the first pretty much mobile fire brigade, right? That prosperity drives innovation, and it also drives innovation in art. Dutch Golden Age produces massive amounts of art that the world had not seen up to this point, that depicts beautiful imagery of regular people. It's much more Northern Renaissance era like, right? This is The Milk Maiden by Vermeer, right? And Vermeer has a even more famous. So we got Vermeer. Johannes Vermeer. Johannes Vermeer is a very, very famous painter who did The Milkmaid, but he has an even more famous painting that many of you know of out of the Dutch Golden Age, and it is known as The Girl with the Pearl Earring, right? So, like, she was a servant, actually, in one of his homes, the girl with the pearl earring, and he found her, wanted her to be a model, and he just painted her, right? And it's beautiful. Portrait works are going to be coming out of the Dutch Golden Age. Beautiful scenes of regular middle-class families that are making money during this time period are going to come out of the Dutch Golden Age, right? Scenes of partying and rejoicing and happiness in the middle-class gentry families of the Dutch Golden Age, right? Landscapes are going to come out of the Dutch Golden Age. Look at that windmill right there, which is so defining of the Netherlands, right? So some of you are like, okay, let's just go to the Netherlands, right? And then, of course, the most famous artist of the Dutch Golden Age, your man, Rembrandt, right? So Rembrandt, Rembrandt. And this is his most famous of works, The Night's Watch, right? So like now, the Rembrandt's works are going to be a very large extension of the Dutch Golden Age as well, showing the prosperity and economic drive that they had, right? Now, we're moving now into the scientific revolution, though, right? So the scientific revolution, this is going to break your brain. Go ahead and give me a space. Drop away, new piece of paper, new header, new thing, because we're now moving into what is known as the age of genius, right? The age of genius, the age of giant leaps forward in scientific discovery, which is going to bring Europe into a more modern understanding of how the universe is shaped, how medicine should work, and how science should leap forward, right? It's also going to have a massive break with church doctrine and interpretations of the Bible, and it's going to become a more modern era state that includes scientific research funded by the state, right? So, but do me a favor really fast, prepare yourself. The next four guys we're about to talk about have no words written with them except for their names, okay? So just prepare yourself for that, okay? It's going to be okay. You can always go back and watch this. You can watch the crash course videos, and you will learn these guys better, okay? Trust me, you just need to know what their biggest contributions are, not every single little factoid about them. Because when we're focused on writing every single little factoid about them, we then kind of start to forget that they're just a big, broad theme. Like, right, when you talk about Galileo, I don't need you to write every single thing that he wrote. I just need you to know why he's so important, right? So that's what helps us write better essays, is looking at the broad and finding little individual pieces of information to pull down, much like stars in the sky, but just choosing which one we want to use, not ranking them by a series of importance. It's a long story, and it's a beautiful story. Let it be beautiful, all right? So we're now moving into the scientific revolution, though, in the age of genius. The scientific revolution, though, also, I need you to write this down. It's going to drive some of y'all nuts. It starts in the 1540s, okay? Some of you are like, Mr. Terry, we were just talking about the Dutch in the 1630s, into the 1700s. Why are we rewinding? Because you have to understand, it's Europe. It's thematic. We're talking about tons of different countries all at once. It's very difficult. But you have to understand that this break with these old themes begins in the 1500s, and it will fast forward very quickly, getting to the era of absolutism in the 1600s, right? Like Louis, for example, was very famous for being one of the very first kings to fund and fund and create the Academy of Sciences in France, right? So he funded this thing, right? Charles II was alive during Isaac Newton's era in the Royal Society of London, right? You had to understand that the scientific revolution was hitting its kind of peak under these absolutists, but you got to talk about where it came from first, right? So the scientific revolution had to base everything it knew off of these natural scientists that we don't even really refer to as natural scientists anymore. We call them ancient philosophers, right? So the very first philosophers that everyone based their intelligence off of, that everyone really kind of understood, there were three of them, right? Natural philosophy is the study of the natural world and the earth, and it's a precursor to modern science, okay? Natural scientists and natural philosophers will regrow their understanding in the 1540s. Copernicus is a natural scientist, natural philosopher. Galileo is one as well. But there were three early ones that were your ancient natural scientists or natural philosophers, and they are Aristotle, Archimedes, and Ptolemy. All right, so Ptolemy. Now look, Aristotle, Archimedes, and Ptolemy are very important figures when you're trying to understand the growth of science and intelligence during the ancient time periods. Aristotle being an ancient Greek philosopher from the 300s BC era, Archimedes being an ancient Greek inventor and mathematician from the 200s BC era, and Ptolemy actually being from the 100s BC era, okay? They all kind of understood and built off of each other, okay? And Aristotle, Ptolemy, and Archimedes all believed in one key understanding and idea, perfect matter, right? They all begin to pioneer this idea that the things that exist outside of planet Earth and our position in the universe being the very center of that universe, that the things that exist outside of us, that everything is perfect, that it is all perfect, they are divine heavenly bodies, and the sky is the beginning of heaven, right? So that is where you get this understanding of, oh, that's where heaven starts, because of these ancient philosophers, right? They believe that perfect things existed outside of Earth, that the other planets were perfect things, that the other stars were perfect things, that the heavens existed there, right? So hence why we refer to the sky sometimes as the heavens, right? So Aristotle, though, is going to be a little bit different from the other guys, okay? So Aristotle believed that the Earth was the very, very center of the universe and that everything revolved around us. This is a geocentric model of the universe. He believed in specific tracks that were all circular, and they all just went like this, right? And the edge of the universe ended somewhere where the stars are, okay? So then Ptolemy comes along, and he creates this idea that includes these things known as epicycles, okay? Because the issue with Aristotle's earliest works of the Earth is in the center and everything goes around us couldn't compensate for this one thing. And it's called retrograde motion. All right, so this is scary. All right, retrograde motion. Retrograde, okay? Retrograde motion is when you look up into the sky and you chart the positions of the planets, and at certain times of the year, they all of a sudden start to look like they're going backwards, right? So they'll go ding, 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 like they'll go backwards for a second. So Aristotle's model didn't compensate for that, whereas Ptolemy's, in his book that he wrote called The Amalgamist, did. He created these things called epicycles. That's what these things are, epicycles. He was like, oh, the retrograde happens because there are these spheres that everything exists inside of, and the planets go on those tracks around the Earth, but then they have their own circular orbits around those tracks as well. That's why things are in retrograde, right? Unfortunately, Ptolemy was not correct. However, Ptolemy did believe that the Earth was round, so that's a big step forward for him. Good for you, Ptolemy, all right? So he knew that part, but he didn't understand that this did not happen. These epicycles were not a thing, right? And we know that now because of our intelligence level, because of the post-scientific revolution understanding of the universe, right? So Ptolemy and Aristotle pioneered the idea of that geocentric model universe. universe, right? And don't let me forget, put a note somewhere about Archimedes. When we start talking about mathematics, we'll come back to him. But he is a very big mathematician who invented the understanding of areas of parabolas, trying to understand the method of exhaustion and stuff like that. And his mathematics tried to bring sense and understanding to prove models like these, right? So the mathematics invented by Archimedes were used by Ptolemy to understand these epicycles, right? But unfortunately, they weren't used properly, right? So, and we know this because the scientific revolution, right? Not this guy, he'll come up in a second, but the guy that kind of pioneers everything forward is a man by the name of Copernicus, right? Nicholas Copernicus. Give me a Okay, so I just checked our time. We're at about 25 minutes right now, okay? So I'm not going to try to go much longer, all right? I'm going to try and keep this in the 20-minute range, okay? Because I like talking about these guys a lot, and if I have to talk about them in class a little bit, that does not hurt my feelings, not even a little bit, not even at all right? So Copernicus, let's talk about him as Nicolaus Copernicus, right, was actually a Polish scientist, right? A Polish scientist who is most famous for releasing a book known as the Revolutions of the Heavenly Spheres. And he releases this book in 1543 on his deathbed. Okay, so now Copernicus is a very influential figure because he looks exactly like Lord Farquaad from Shrek. All right, try to tell me he doesn't. Try to tell me he doesn't. You're a liar if you tell me that he doesn't look exactly like Lord Farquaad from Shrek. Okay, so in 1543, though, Nicholas Copernicus releases his book known as the Revolutions of Heavenly Spheres. And he does this because in his mathematical studies and in his astronomical studies, from looking out at the night sky, he noticed some irregularities, right? Some irregularities in the church doctrine understanding of the revolutions of the heavenly spheres going around Earth and stuff. He was like, that can't make any sense due to the fact of the charting of the stars and the movement of planets and also the movement of other things in the night sky. We must be going around the sun, right? So he is the one who pioneers in his book known as The Revolutions of Heavenly Spheres, or what all the cool kids call it in college, De Rev, right? Like, so, because when he originally released it, it was actually written in Latin. It's like, De Revolutionis de Numenumenis Verberderp. All right, so, but all the cool kids call it De Rev, right? You wear sunglasses and a beret and you drink espresso and you talk about De Rev, apparently. And anyway, but he releases this and he uses a mathematical foundation and a mapping of the universe to say, oh no, the sun is at the center and we are going around it, right? But the thing about it is, he didn't release this and have it published until he was on his deathbed. Reason being is because he probably didn't want to be persecuted. You know what usually happens whenever you bring up ideas that nobody wants to hear? You usually get burned at the stake. Just like this guy. Giordano Bruno was a monk that actually agreed with Copernicus in 1600, and he was burned at the stake by the Inquisition, right? So that's what happens whenever you introduce new ideas. But it's also a little bit cocky and arrogant for us to sit here and think that Copernicus was the one guy that figured this out, because he wasn't, all right? So there's guys that came before him that introduced this model. There's a philosopher from the Greek period known as Archimos that actually literally came up with the concept of a sun-centered universe first, but no one listened to him, right? And then like Nicolas Araim, also from France, a French scientist that said the same thing as well, but no one listened to him. Reason why no one listened to Araim, though, and also the reason no one listened to Archimos, is because they existed before the printing press. Angelina Murphy. Yes, the printing press, right? They didn't have the printing press at their disposal, whereas Copernicus did, right? So Copernicus, when he releases his findings in De Rev, he introduces what is known as the Copernican model, right? The sun at the center of the universe, and also the correct order of the planets. Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And he also puts the moon on a revolution around the Earth, right? And he also believed that the stars were fixed in a giant ring around those things. And some of you are like, where are the other planets? Well, he couldn't see them. He was using the naked eye, and he was charting stars using graphs and like mathematical models, right? But he introduces the Copernican model on his deathbed, and the story goes that he woke out of a coma, saw his book printed, and then died, right? So, and then it was released onto the populace of Europe, and it became one of the most massive, groundbreaking scientific models ever. And then it is taken up by this guy, Tycho Brahe. All right, Tycho Brahe, a Danish scientist, and I love to talk about him because a star is born inside of himself. But we will talk about him in class because I don't want to take up too much of your weekend, and we will talk about the big understandings of these guys a little bit later. Y'all have a good one.